Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeremy Collins, the Director of Conferences and Symposia here at the National World War II Museum, and it's great to have you all here. This is a program long in the making, and I want to make a quick recognition of those who have helped make this possible, including our primary sponsor, presenting sponsor, Hancock Whitney, but also one of my dear colleagues who has been pushing this program through, including this special component for the Community Outreach Day. Sarah Kirksey, who's standing in the back, has been spearheading this with her team. And Sarah, thank you for bringing this group here today. Thank you for being a part of this wonderful weekend. Sarah, wave. The actors, cast, crew, family members, friends of what we know as Easy Company or Band of Brothers typically gets together as often as they can, usually annually. And when they do, they want to try to do something with community outreach. We had worked with some of our community partners here in New Orleans to see how we might get some of the actors to a VA or to a veterans home. But due to the current climate, that was not as desirable to send a bunch of people into a hospital with some of our veterans who are recuperating there. So what we wanted to do was get you all here. And it's a pretty cool venue when you've got a P-51 and B-17 and an SBD Dauntless overhead. So a quick show of hands. Who has been to the museum before? That's wonderful. Awesome. You have a band. Hopefully you have a wristband. If you didn't get a wristband or a badge, I guess you got. That will give you access to the museum throughout the day, so I hope you enjoy seeing it again or seeing it for the first time. Today we have our first session, which will be moderated by Kirk Sadusky. Kirk is a dear friend of the museum's, but more importantly for this weekend, he has been an executive and producer at Playtone for 23 years. Among his projects, he has worked on Band of Brothers, John Adams, David McCullough, Painting with Words. David, who we just lost this past week, he was a dear friend of the museum as well. The Pacific, He Has Seen War, and Game Change. He's also heavily involved in the upcoming project Masters of the Air, about the 8th Air Force over Europe. Kirk is also co-executive producer on CNN's Decades series, as well as the network's The Movies. As I mentioned, he's a friend of the museum's. He's been a presidential counselor, which is an advisory board that we have here at the National World War II Museum since its inception in 2006, and he's a narrative consultant at the National Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. Kirk Sadusky, take it away.
Thank you, Jeremy. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for all of that. First thing I want to do is introduce everybody else who's up on stage. Everybody here was involved in Band of Brothers in some fashion. Jody Burke was one of the producers of the companion documentary that we did called We Stand Alone Together. Jody got to know very well a lot of the men who are, I'm sure, household names. If you're a Band of Brothers fan, you know who Carwood Lipton was, Shifty Powers, Bill Garnier, let alone Dick Winters, and etc. Jody knew almost all of them and interviewed, so we'll hear a lot from Jody. John Orloff is a screenwriter on many projects, but most importantly this weekend, he wrote 2 episodes of Band of Brothers. He wrote the D-Day episode, Day of Days, and the Why We Fight episode, which I'm sure many of you, again, the liberation of the labor camp outside of Dachau. Those are John's 2 episodes. John's also working with us as an executive producer and our lead writer on Masters of the Air. George Luz Jr. was the son of George Luz, who was a main character in Band of Brothers, and of course obviously has the most direct contact with any of the real members of Easy Company. Rick Gomez is the actor who played George in this series, and Rick has maintained a true friendship and bond with the family, as has happened quite a bit. Are they doing funny stuff behind me? Yeah, okay. As you can tell. And that happened quite a bit, I will say. And I think Rick and George can talk more about it, that a lot of the actors end up becoming friends with the men they portrayed and their families. And even though none of the men are with us any longer, those relationships obviously continue. And Jason O'Mara was also played, who's right behind me, and don't make any faces. It also played one of our characters, and again, he was not able to meet the character he played because that character died, which we show in the series. But I'll let Jason explain all of that. So. To begin, I think I'm going to start with John. John, you write a lot of your projects are historically based, and Band of Brothers obviously has there's a certain responsibility. I think you and I have talked about so much over the years. What is it like when you have to turn real stories about real men, real important stories? What's the obligation you feel to do that?
Well, I actually had kind of two experiences on Band, because episode 2 is very close to the facts that we knew, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then in Why We Fight, the guys didn't want to talk about it that much, so there's a little bit more creative license in there, and so I sort of felt my responsibility in that episode was slightly different than my responsibility in episode 2. Episode 2, obviously the responsibility to get that day as accurate as possible and let the audience feel viscerally what those guys that we follow on D-Day went through. And it was, Dick Winters would say, it was the most important day of his life, and getting that right was really important, I think, for all of us who worked on Band. I mean, specifically the D-Day moment, because that was a transformative experience, not just for Easy Company, but Dick Winters personally. And then episode 9 is a little different, because I sort of felt, well, first of all, when Tom asked me to write episode 9, after I'd written episode 2, I totally panicked and froze, and because of the responsibility of taking the responsibility, what I just discussed, the men of Easy and portraying their story accurately, then had to be magnified by getting the Holocaust right and sharing with an audience the realities of Nazi atrocities. And so it had an elevated responsibility for me, episode 9.
But, it reminds me, especially, as you, again, I think, raising of hands, who has seen Band of Brothers? Yeah, we figured it. So you're familiar. So the episode 2 was D-Day, as I mentioned, and it was very much about Richard Winters and everything that he had trained for almost 2 years. This was the day of days. Episode 9 is interesting, and I'll tell you one personal anecdote. We had Major Winters at the Plantone offices before we went into production, as we were getting to know him, and more importantly, he was getting to know us. And we were talking about the experiences, and then he kind of walked us through chronologically his experience, first at Toccoa, and then in England, and then in France and Holland, etc., and Germany. And when he got to the point where he talked about coming across this camp outside of Dachau, he hesitated, and Dick didn't hesitate very often, and because he didn't really know how to describe it. And again, if you remember, they came across what was a labor camp, and they saw something, and he couldn't figure out. The men couldn't figure out, and I'll never forget what Major Winters said. He said, we had no frame of reference, These are men who had been at war now for almost a year, had been on a D-Day all the way into Germany. They had seen, and in some cases done, some tough things, but they had no frame of reference for what they were looking at, which were men. I don't think there were any women. It was men behind emaciated, skeleton-like men behind barbed wire, dead bodies. I don't need to describe it further than that. So it was just interesting that Dick said, they didn't, he used a phrase, he said, it was almost as if we came across a group of Martians in a field. They just didn't know what they were looking at. So that's, John had, please.
Add something. So when I was writing that episode, we would all the writers would talk to the living veterans to ask questions. What did you do when this happened? What did you feel when this happened? And I had a problem with the concentration camp because when I would ask the guys, mostly they just wouldn't talk about it. They just said, I can't talk about that. The memory, even 50 years later, was too awful for them to bring up. But when I was talking to Dick about it, it was the late 90s, and it was just when Holocaust denialism was starting to become a thing, and books were being written and stuff. And Dick was furious about Holocaust denialism. I mean, furious. And he felt it was so important to tell this story, the episode 9 story, and what they saw. And he kept on saying to me, I was there, John. I saw it. I was there. And so, so there's a huge responsibility in taking on these stories. You know, you don't do it lightly.
Well, so as I mentioned, John also is working with us on Masters of the Air, which is about the 8th Air Force. It's about B-17s in England and the air war against Germany. And when we did Badner Brothers, we got to meet Dick Winters and Carwood Lipton and Bill Garnier and dozens of the men of Easy Company. On Masters of the Air, as John knows so well, none of them, we never met any of the men that we were portraying. They had all passed before we started. So, John, let me ask you, the difference between, the responsibility, the freedom maybe?
I actually found it not freeing. I found it difficult because of Band of Brothers and because of the responsibility that we undertook when we did Band. I felt a similar responsibility on Masters and getting things right, and it was a lot harder getting things right because we couldn't call up our characters like we could on Band. I mean, I spoke to Winters for years. I spoke to Winters every couple of weeks, and same with Lipton and Malarkey, and you could call them up whenever and ask them whatever, and they would tell you, and we did not have that on Masters.
And we also, I think, talk about the idea that you got a sense of who these men really were, where with
That's
Masters,
a very good point.
we've really had to, there's a lot of literature, and you and I have had a lot of discussions over the last few years of who were they, but at the end of the day,
that's very true, and we did have to figure out who these were as characters in Masters of the Air, the new show. Our two main guys, Clevin and Egan, they'd been dead for a long time. Egan's been dead for 50 years. So it was really hard who is Egan? As opposed to, I spent time with Winters and Lipton, and I got drunk with Garnier and Heffron and shit-faced, actually, so I felt I knew I could channel Garnier or Heffron or whoever because I'd gotten drunk with them.
Yeah, I think it's an experience a few of us had over.
I think we all got drunk with them.
Yeah.
Well,
during the interviews.
Let's go to George, because we're talking about the men of Easy Company and getting to know them and how important that was to the creative process. But you had the most personal experience of all. Your father was George Luz and was an integral part of Easy Company. Tell us about being the son of someone from such an iconic endeavor.
Well, it was really cool. Yeah, at 9 years old, I went to my very first reunion in 1965 in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. They had been getting together since 1946. And my mom and dad, this was something, an annual event that they tried to get to most every year. And I uncovered an article recently from the general at Fort Campbell, and he sent out the early flyer, and it said, hey, I've heard some stuff from some of the members, some of the soldiers, and they'd like to bring their families along. So I guess I was a recipient of that, my sister and I. So we got to go to reunions early on as a kid in 65 and 68 and in 1970. And 1981 was in San Diego, and I was older. So, when you're 9 years old and you're at a reunion, you're just happy it has a pool. It's like, hey, this is cool. It's got a pool. So, but in 1981, it was different because I was older. I was 23 or 24 years old, and I was to get a chance to visit with the men as an adult, so to speak. And I was also had the opportunity to get a chance to meet some of the other kids who were my age, some of the Gordon girls, or Buck Compton's daughters, and Don Malarkey's daughter, Mary Ann. So, we've all kind of been on this journey since 1942 when they all got together. It's been an amazing ride for me to connect with my dad's buddies to the degree that I was able to. In 1998, he was killed in a tragic accident. And I reached out to every one of his buddies. And I wasn't Luz, but I was Luz's kid. So they embraced me, and they filled an important void with my dad passing away. So it's been a great journey for me, looking through my father's eyes.
One of the things I think we all noticed, I remember the first reunion I went to was in Denver in 1999, I believe. Yeah. Jody, you were there.
I went to that one.
And I was struck, and I was the Playtone representative, so I had to give a little talk and welcome everybody and tell them about us. But I was struck immediately by, it wasn't just a reunion of not infantry, a paratroop company. It was an extended family reunion, because they truly, Easy Company at large is a family. And that was the first thing as an outsider coming in that I noticed, is that it truly was as if it was just one big extended family, and it was cousins and second cousins and brothers and aunts and uncles. And so that the men, the closeness of the men obviously was handed down generationally. Rick Gomez played George Luz. And of course, John had a particular responsibility to interpret these guys and to get their story correct. You had to interpret and get the story of one man correct. Tell us what that was like.
Responsibility had come up a bunch. That word just over and over, it's sort of impossible to dodge it. Really quickly before we go into that, I want to say the one thing we got right more than anything, or the proof of what we got right, is we're exactly the same. Every single cast member, it has replicated what they did, Easy Company did. We are family, through and through.
Please tell everybody about that.
I've been to 12 or 13 births of children in hospitals for the first. I've seen kids get born. People have delivered lasagnas, and we're family. We see each other all the time. We still make things together. We still need each other. We see each other, and we love each other. It's crazy.
Just as Rick, tell us, just as Easy Company started meeting, and was it 46 or 47? 46, and met, I think, every year. Maybe there were a couple exceptions, up until in the 2000s after the series aired, and just through attrition, obviously the men couldn't attend anymore. But the actors have been doing the same thing.
Same thing.
So, every
Same
year
thing.
the actors get together at Mike Cutletz's house in Sherman Oaks, California, and for now 20 years.
20 years. COVID was the only thing that stopped us, but and which broke our hearts. But yeah, every single year. And we sit in Bull's kitchen and drink his beer.
And this is not normal. This does not normally
No, it's absolutely not
happen
normal.
in
But what's kind of
entertainment.
amazing is that there's all these reflections and the responsibility of those reflections, because that's all we are. We're this memorial. The responsibility of that, the weight of that, every single cast member took so seriously. I remember speaking to your mom for hours before I shipped off. And she probably at one point got a little frustrated with me, like, I think that's everything to know. I'd be like, yeah, but when he would go to this, when he came home, and I think that's just about everything you need to know. But we had this responsibility to get it right. And the thing that we realized was part of getting it right was to use each other to get there, which really is the story of Band of Brothers. Like, you can't do it by yourself. You can't do it by yourself. And everyone who tried wound up off, and we'd come on back. Because that's what the company became. We became that thing. And I remember sitting, I'm not gonna keep talking and talking, although I could, man, it's horrible. This is the wrong guy to have a mic.
That's why I put mine down.
Exactly. Not me. Not me, George. We were sitting in right before the premiere on the beach. We were in Paris with Babe and Bill, and I'm sitting at a table, and Bill goes, "Well, kid, you better be funny." And I go, "Yeah. I mean, like, really funny. George was funny." And Babe, I go, no. I think he's funny. Yeah, it'll be all right." And Babe's like, "Oh, forget about it. Good luck." And I'm like,
You do a good Bill.
yeah. So, but there was, I remember sitting next to Frank going like, "Oh, God, save me, man. What are we, because that's all that mattered. That's all that mattered is when these men watched what we did, that they would go, good job. Day in and day out. That was it.
That was the A on the.
That was it. That's the only reason to be there is for them to go, yep.
Rick referred to the HBO premiered Band of Brothers on the beach, on Utah Beach, was designated as Utah Beach. In Normandy, they built a big structure, and which was an extraordinary event that nobody who was involved in any way will ever forget. But part of the experience was that we all stayed together for a week in Paris.
That's amazing.
And it was for and what was interesting about it is we at the end everybody would scatter and go, and it was the family, the men, most importantly it was the men, their families, then a lot of us involved with production in various levels. And no matter what you did that day, somebody would gone to the Louvre and somebody maybe went out to Versailles, but we all got together every night at the bar afterwards. And the guys, Bill Garnier, Babe Heffron,
Oh my God.
some of the others would hold court.
Oh my gosh.
And we were just wrapped. It was as much fun as you could possibly be. In fact, I don't if you guys remember when we were coming back, we were in Carrington, we were in Cannes, or Cannes, I should say, and the train was delayed. So what do these guys want to do? Hit the bar. So we found a couple of local pubs that were open, and once again, and these guys held court, and they could definitely hold court.
Oh my gosh. And Kirk, we took a train to the site. Do you remember the train we took to the site? And I sat with your mom, and she held my hand. My wife was there at the time. Your mom was, I don't care about your wife. And she held my hand, and we were arm in arm the entire time, and we came off the train, and she went through the throngs of these people saying, "Liberator," and she's holding on to me, and she's going, you can't ever leave me. And I'm like, we're together this is it. This is you and me. This is it, kid. We're going to do this thing. And she's like, It was so amazing. The experience, like you said, it'll never happen. It was a miracle. It was a miracle that we got to do that with them.
And it's funny because most of the guys, this was so unexpected, but they took it so naturally too. They were rock stars everywhere, especially after the show came out. They were rock stars, and they handled it all pretty well, pretty seamlessly. Speaking of which, I want to bring Jody into the conversation. Of all of us up here on stage, I think Jody probably got to know more of the men better than any of us. As I mentioned, Jody was one of the producers of the documentary, and she conducted a lot of the interviews. One of the things over the years I'm sure we've all heard is when people tell you how much they love the series, almost inevitably they talk about the footage that began every episode of The Real Men. We don't identify who it is, and they're not telling us the particular story. It's just kind of a thematic setting a tone for what you're about to see. Well, those interviews were conducted over about a year's period, Jody, and Jody conducted quite a few of them, a lot in the homes of the veterans themselves. So, Jody, I'm just going to ask you, tell us about some of your experiences, some of the ones that are most memorable.
Oh gosh. Well, I just want to say, honestly, I had the great privilege of meeting these heroes. They never would call themselves heroes, of course, before they became rock stars. And when you're interviewing somebody as a journalist, the first time you talk to them about something, it's always magical, because just as you know, whenever somebody starts repeating a story, it becomes a little bit less fresh and a little bit. So, we were the first ones out.
Yeah, let me set it up just a little bit. I should have set you up better. So when we decided, HBO and Playtone and then DreamWorks decided we were going to do this, the very first thing we did, and I think it was Tom Hanks and Gary Getzman said, we've got to go out and interview these men. We've got to get them on film, no matter what we do with it, no matter if the series ever gets made, we have to do it. So Playtone contacted Mark Cowan, who we knew very well from Cowan Herzog, who Jody worked for, and we basically sent them to the homes of Carwood, Lipton, Shifty Powers, etc. And before a word had been written, before we met any of them, Jody and Mark and Will were kind of the shock troops. So
we would fly to. We flew first. We were going to some gentleman's house. He actually died as we were driving the van from the airport to go interview him.
Wow.
And we didn't really know what to do except call up Tom Hanks and say, I think we need to hurry this up, because we didn't get a story, and it's like what you're dealing with now. And so I guess you guys called HBO, and they just wrote a check immediately. And so we had this unbelievable opportunity, which will never again be repeated, probably for me as a documentarian, to have the budget to go and interview everyone. So we flew to, we kept driving. The next person was Carwood Lipton. And Popeye Wynn first, and then Carwood. And then Carwood Lipton sent us to Shifty Powers. And then we took a break for a couple weeks, and then we went to Pennsylvania, and we did Babe and Bill together in South Philly in Garner's row house, which was really, it was one of the sweltering days of summer, and we had to turn the air conditioner off because it was too loud to record the audio. And they had started drinking long before we arrived, of course. And it was like 110 degrees, there was no breeze, and everybody was just sweating. And they actually were the only, and then we interviewed Major Winters after that, first at his house in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and then out at his farm later. But I guess the thing that surprised us most was when we would show up to interview these gentlemen, is that we'd walk in and their whole family would be there. It wouldn't just be the guy, it would be his wife, his children, the grandchildren, and they all were coming to hear Grandpa tell his story for the first time, because we didn't realize that they hadn't even told their wives what had happened. And so when we started asking them questions, like this is not a generation of men who went to therapy. You know, they had never told anybody what they did until we walked into their living room. And, you know, we were unprepared at first, but we soon realized that we needed to arm ourselves with a lot of Kleenex, actually.
Yes. Well, that's a good point. And truly, that most of the guys, I think to a man probably, they didn't relate those stories. I remember when Mark Cowan, who was the director, called us from the road after 2 or 3 days, and he said, every time we pull up to somebody, a new house, it's the extended family. It might be the neighbors. It might be a brother or a sister. And initially, he thought, and we kind of assumed, well, they think Tom Hanks is going to be there, or it's lights, cameras, action, and there's a glamour to that. So everyone's, and very Jody and Mark, and they realized very quickly that it had nothing to do with any of that. This is the first time Grandpa's told a story, literally, 40 years later.
Hey, Kirk, I would argue that the reunions that they had were their therapy. For those 60 years,
Absolutely.
they would get together once a year, someplace in the middle of the country,
Yes.
and they would be together for 3 or 4 days and talk to each other about what happened.
Yes, you're right, John. I'm glad you said that. I remember asking a number of guys, why didn't you talk about it? And I got 2 common answers, and I'm sure maybe you guys got similar. And they would say 2 things. One, why would I tell my family, my wife, my children, my grandchildren about the worst things I've ever seen? One gentleman said, when we leave here, if you leave here tonight, you see a car accident, and then you see the carnage as a result, would you go home and describe it to your wife or to your kids? But the other thing, and I think it's more to the point, was they said it all the time. If you weren't there, you couldn't understand. I spoke of Major Winters saying there's no frame of reference. A lot of you probably have a frame of reference, but if you're not there, there's no frame of reference. That's why they would get together, because they would get together to discuss it with men who did understand, who were there. Jody, you were telling me a story. I know the story about, last night you were telling me about what Major Winters meant to this project in terms of memorializing. I know that the night before or 2 nights before, Jody and their crew would show up at someone's home to the interview, Major Winters, still the company commander, would call them and prepare them and tell them it's okay, you can trust these guys. We got to know Major Winters first for obvious reasons, and he kind of gave us the sign of approval to his men, and he kind of prepared them. And talk about how important that was, Jody, and just what Major Winters contributed to this whole project.
Yeah, I think because they had chosen to not share their stories, when we would show up, they had a very definite sense that they were doing it for history and for this moment that we're actually experiencing right now. And I feel like it's our responsibility, because we did get to know them and hear their story, to keep telling it. It's really important to do that, because it's so easy for war to be glamorized. And when you were talking about the Holocaust, I was thinking about looking through the Library of Congress reels when we were pulling the B-roll. And there was actually, officers would make, when they liberated the concentration camps, they would make everybody who lived in the towns, even the little children, walk through to witness what they had allowed to happen in their villages. And the Library of Congress has, you can see these movies of like people throwing up, and as they're walking past like the stacks of bodies, and it's horrifying. So for anybody to deny that, I'm right. But when we got to the farm in Hershey, Pennsylvania, to answer your question, he called. I lucked out because one of my jobs was to entertain the veteran while the boys were setting up the cameras and the lights and everything. In fact, when we first walked into Gardner's house, I was carrying a camera case, and Babe and Bill leapt up, put their drinks down, leapt up and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. What are you doing? Don't let that girl carry that camera case. She's a delicate flower." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm a delicate flower." So I got to spend a little bit extra time with the men, which was great. And so during one of these lulls, he called me over and he showed me his journal.
You're talking about Dick Winters.
An Winters showed me his journal, yeah. And I started leafing through it, and I realized that this is his war journal that he kept as an officer, and he was very thoughtful. And the reason why Stephen Ambrose had a book to write was because Dick Winters paid attention every moment of his life, every day and every moment. Even he didn't know, that it was going to become what it was. He didn't even know that he was going to survive, but he still wrote everything down and paid attention. And I just think it's so important to remember to do that in our lives, to pay attention.
Yes. Major Winters kept, as Jody said, a journal, maps. He really memorialized his experience, but I think what he was really doing was memorializing the experience of Easy Company. I think the series would have been much different. Certainly the documentary would be much different if he hadn't done that. But more to the point is he understood the importance, obviously, of the undertaking and what these guys were doing. And I know, go ahead, John.
I wanted to ask you a question, because Dick Winters was a pretty tough guy. He was not impressed by anything, and why would he be? What do you think made him trust you guys so much? Because you think, oh, it's Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. Dick Winters would not care that it was Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, and he was a very judgmental, tough guy. He was an amazing man, and he didn't suffer fools, and he had no time for bullshit, basically. And yet he did do all of this for us, and he did call those men. And I imagine, because I was later in the process, how did you guys get Dick to trust you?
I think, well, to echo John's characterization of Major Winters, I don't know how many college basketball fans are here, but I would say, and I went to UCLA, and I grew up in Los Angeles. And the one person that Dick Winters reminded me more than anyone was John Wooden. He had such a sense of command, if you guys are familiar with Coach John Wooden of UCLA. He had such a sense of command the moment he walked into a room. And there was a gravity to him, and he was tough, but he was a fair man, to your point. I think a few things. One, but it was Tom. This was right after Saving Private Ryan had become such an unexpected hit that I think, and a lot of the men told us all that they started feeling comfortable talking about their experiences when they saw that Saving Private Ryan struck such a cultural chord in America. When Steven Spielberg was able to bring to film a candor of what combat is remotely like. It wasn't antiseptic and it wasn't clean. We were talking about this the other night too. I think our culture changed in that moment in Saving Private Ryan when the ramp of the Higgins boat drops and bing, 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 three men are dead. And you'd never seen that before. And of course, that's what we can only imagine it must have been like on Omaha Beach that day. And when the country responded, like, we want to hear more of this. We don't need to be sheltered from the truth. They started telling us the truth. So I think that had something to do with it. Tom courted Richard Winters. He was honored too. Sorry.
I've got a point.
Yeah, I'm sorry? Go.
Yeah, you talk about Winters and his command within the unit, after the war was over. he sent my mom a Christmas card, and he really stayed connected to my mom and the widows after the soldiers passed away, and that was something I admired about Winters. Every piece of literature that he would send out to the men about what's coming up would come to my mom as well. And at Christmas, he sent this card, and he said, this was right after the series, and he said, Dale, I miss George. How he would have enjoyed this past year with all his company friends. Now it's up to you and all his friends to make sure he will never be forgotten. Hang tough, Dick Winters. And that was the guy he was. He stayed connected to the end.
Yeah, hang tough. That was Dick's phrase. But to conclude the point, and I'm sorry, I was just remembering back to those days. Tom very much did court Dick. What Band of Brothers happened because after Saving Private Ryan was such a hit, of course Hollywood wanted to repeat the experience, and there was talk about turning Stephen Ambrose's book Citizen Soldiers into a movie, and Tom said, "I don't want to do that." But one of the books I read preparing for Saving Private Ryan was Band of Brothers. I'd be very interested in doing that as a limited series, probably at HBO. And that's what started it. But it was, so Tom already got it. He had prepared to play Captain Miller in Saving Private Ryan. So now he was meeting the real Captain Miller. So he like I said, he courted him. And I think, but everyone we introduced to Dick, we got to know him. Eric Jenderson, who was our lead writer on the show and will be on Panelist tomorrow, got to know Dick very well, and Dick and Ethel really got to trust Eric. And then when we introduced John and Bruce McKenna and Graham Yost and Max Fry and Eric Bork, he could sense. He had a very good sense of what was inside a man, and I think we just introduced him to some really good people. And as like I said, Jody and Mark and her crowd met them before any of us. We had talked to Dick, but we hadn't met him yet. And again, as I think you can tell, they were true believers. So I think it was a combination that he just came to trust us. He realized we had what we had in our hearts.
Right.
I'm going to turn to Jason O'Mara, who also played one of the characters. He played Lieutenant Thomas Meehan. And if you know the show, Thomas Meehan was supposed to be Easy Company's commander, but he was shot down the night before D-Day when the men were approaching to make their landings. So I'm going to let Jason talk about that experience and portraying Lieutenant Meehan.
Thanks, Kirk. Yeah, we're talking about this sense of heightened responsibility, and when you're playing someone who really lived, really served, and really died in action, there's this sense of just trying to honor that. And, not all the parts were starring roles. They couldn't be. So the role of Thomas Meehan had to, by its definition, end prematurely, just like his life did. So I was trying to find ways to honor his memory, to do more somehow than just play a few scenes. And during production, I was talking to one of the webbing guys, and he said, he was an English guy, and he said, "You going to the memorial, mate?" And I said, what memorial? What are you talking about? He says, "Well, in France, they're doing a memorial for Meehan and his plane. It's next weekend." And I was like, tell me everything. So cut to, I'm outside this church one morning, and people are filing in, and I've showed up without an invitation, and I'm using really bad French to try and blag my way into this thing. And I chose 7 words that work in any language, which is Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, Band of Brothers, and they finally let me in. And it was all in French. We went outside, and there was a memorial that was covered. And they were just about to unveil it, and there was this sound coming from a bridge down the road over a river. And everybody turned, and it was the sounds of boots on the ground marching. And a platoon of American paratroopers in full uniform approached the area. They came to attention and saluted as it was unveiled, and the flag was raised. And there was a major present who gave respects. I think they played taps, did an about turn, went back over to the bridge where their bus awaited or whatever it was. And I was just so impressed that the memory, and it was a beautiful memorial too. It was the tail of a C-47 to commemorate Stick 66. Thomas Meehan was he was a sensitive man. He was an artist and a natural leader, and I think he would have done every bit as well as Winters had he survived. But we don't get to tell that story because we don't know how that played out. So after the memorial, I was taken to a field by a couple of Belgian guys that call themselves the Forced Landing Association, and they look for crash sites, and they look for personal belongings in order to return them to their families. And so they took me to this field right around the corner from the church in this little town called Bouzeville-au-Plain. And I said, look at this. And they said, and they took me to the field. I looked in, and it was easy to see where the crash site was, because in one corner, grass still doesn't grow. It burned for days. It was full of Bangalore torpedoes and ammunition. And they said that in excavating the site, they found a few things, multiple detonated M1 rifle bullets, of course, but also a ring. And they presented me with this ring, standing in the field, and I held it in my hand, and on the inside of the ring was etched TM. So I guess I found my connection with the man somehow, decades later, after the fact. And I feel somehow I was able to touch him. I believe they couldn't find a family member to accept that ring, so it now lives in the museum close by. So I'm going to end with this. Before he left in his C-47, First Lieutenant Thomas Meehan III wrote a letter to his wife. And I think you'll see from the letter that it reflects everything that we were trying to do with the series, ultimately. Trying to make the connection, but also the reason why these men should be remembered then, today, and forever. And the first time I read this letter, the words were seared into my brain, so I don't even need to read it. It goes like this. Dearest Dan, in a few hours, I'm going to take the best company of men in the world into France. We'll give the bastards hell. Strangely, I'm not particularly scared, but in my heart is a terrific longing to hold you in my arms. I love you forever. Yours, Tom.
Thank you, Jason. I would urge anybody here with an interest in the story of Easy Company or the American or the Allied effort in World War II, if you ever can, to make it to Normandy. So much of what the men did is so well commemorated and memorialized there. The American cemetery over Omaha Beach is extraordinary. Every American at some point should try to make it. It is very much worth your while if you ever can. We're going to open up, so thank you guys, thank everybody. We're going to open up to questions. Anybody, please, any questions for any of us up here about the show, about the men, anything that we can answer, please let us know.
Yeah, before we get to that, a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you very much. Please do raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. It always is the farthest away from where I start.
Hi, my name's Bill Waymeyer. I'm a retired United States Marine, captain on disability since March '88, and I am a paratrooper. I was with 2nd Anglico, and I know the Marines back there and know what an Anglico is. And I was prior service Army. I have a dad and 2 uncles who were in World War II. Oldest uncle was North Africa, Sicily, Italy, D-Day, end of the war. Took a little break, went back in 1950, and served for 24 total years. My dad did his stint. That's how I know about Bastogne and other areas that y'all learned about during the show. Hearing y'all talk, my old man, Dad, was the same as what y'all are talking about these veterans. And I'm the oldest of his 2nd marriage. I survived. I still have hide on my body because Dad didn't accept any crap either. And I just say all this because I think what y'all did in Band of Brothers, I read the book when I heard the show was coming out. I finally bought the book and read it when I was working for the VA in Boston. Had a chance. I was on the end of my line of the T, so I read it going into work every day, and I finished it up before the show aired. As a paratrooper, I can say this. There's something that I can't explain about what makes a man or a woman who's been through airborne training want to jump out of a perfectly good aircraft. You're flying, you're alive. But I can tell you this right now. After you do it, and there's only one thing that made me do it, I was thinking about all those guys in World War II. I thought about my dad and my uncle. And I have one more thing to add real quick. I'll mention about the new series, Masters of the Air. I had an uncle, older. My first uncle was born in 16. My dad was born in Christmas Day of 22. And he was in the 106th Division. And while this other uncle, he was born in 06, 1 year younger than my grandparents. And short guy, slender, he was a ball turret gunner. And he had the unique experience of being a man who wanted to fly on the aircraft with his friend on his day off. And his friend was a tail gunner. So he went on his friend's aircraft on this one mission in '43, and the plane got hit by ACAT. As a tail gunner, he was able to jump out that little hole in the back. His buddy went down with the aircraft. And that uncle died of intestinal complications in 1977. And I'm saying all this not so much as a question, but to let y'all know you got it right. You had a book to work with of Dr. Ambrose, and I also like the Pacific series. I just wish that's just a large scope, and you did a good job at what you could manage.
Thank you very much. And I want to. I'm glad you said the Pacific, because I do want to throw it to George and Jody, but to the Marines, I have a special affection for the Marines, having worked on the Pacific. So Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Peleliu, Okinawa, so, and the 1st Marine Division. So thank you for remembering the Pacific. George, I'm gonna throw it to you for in a second, but Jody, you were telling me about what Shifty Powers told you about riding in an airplane.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about one of the things that surprised us was how, when we started asking them about the war and their experiences, they would light up at first because they were summoning their 18-year-old selves, right? And so it was this extraordinary experience of seeing this 80-year-old man suddenly become a teenager again. And And, I grew up in the shadow of Vietnam, and war wasn't something that was really ever celebrated. And to be interviewing these World War II soldiers and to see, this was like the biggest adventure of their lives, because many of them had to quit school when they were 12 and work on the family farm, and suddenly they were getting to go to Europe. And anyway, Shifty was telling me that he had never been in an airplane and until he had to jump out of one over and over and over and over and over 5 times. And he said it had been many years until he landed in an airplane. Which, when you think about it now, I mean, commercial aviation in 1943 was not something that most people like Shifty Powers or any of those veterans had the opportunity to do. So.
Actually, the C-47 was turned into the DC-3
Yeah.
after the war and was one of the first commercial airliners.
George, did your dad ever talk about that experience? I mean, just being a paratrooper, being in the Army, but let alone, because paratroopers was the elite. Did he ever talk about that element of it?
Well, he was certainly very proud to be a paratrooper. I've got a video clip of my dad that he had done an interview several months before he passed away in 1998. And I always thought, he went in because he wanted to be part of a special group. A special group, you say. Well, no, it wasn't. It was because they paid $50 extra a month. My dad grew up in a depression. They didn't have a lot of money. I think he was saying in that clip he made $16 a week. And this was in 1940 or whatever it might have been.
And his dad gave him shit.
Yeah. So anyway, when my dad joined the military, joined the airborne because it was $50 extra a month, his father was a little annoyed that he would do something as drastic as that. So, but so that was my dad, but he was amazingly proud of being an airborne guy and extremely proud to be with these men. It was a defining point in his life.
Other questions?
Thank you, and thank you all for being here and sharing stories. Really appreciate that. My name is Michael Wallace. I'm a Navy vet, and if I remember correctly, I think Band of Brothers premiered on September 9th, 2001.
Yes.
And I remember watching it, and 2 days later, we all know what happened. And what you all may not realize is that that show had a real big influence on me. I was a history nerd. I loved the first 2 episodes, and then what happened afterwards, continuing to watch those episodes, it kind of brought home that, there have been dark times in our history, but yet there have been people who have answered that call. So, from this old Navy vet, I really appreciate it, and thank you all.
Well, let's talk about that for just a second. Yes, a lot of people don't remember that our show premiered on September 9th, 2001. And so what that meant, though, was that for the next 2 months of Sundays, America got to see itself at its best. Not just through the scripted drama, but more importantly, we opened every episode with the men, talking about something that was thematically or tonally relevant to what the episode was going to be about. But every Sunday, for 2 months, America was reminded of what we were capable of and who we were at our best. And I will say, and I'm sure everybody up here has their own experience, for the last 20 years, you travel around and you meet someone who realizes that you've had anything to do with Band of Brothers, you hear those kinds of stories over and over again about men and women who joined, inspired partially by, yes, the time, of course, our country in peril, but also the story of Easy Company. And I've heard it. I know John has, Jody, George, Rick, Jason, Rick.
And just for 2 seconds on this, so I'm a New Yorker, and I just moved to California. I got married on September 15th, 4 days after We premiered on the 9th. All the boys came to my wedding. I have a picture with the entire cast at my wedding, post 9/11.
I didn't get an invitation.
Well, you were, who knows where you were. Don't ruin the moment. And so the thing that I always try and remember is that the firefighters and first responders and then construction workers and so many people were on that site for months. That burned for months. And it was after episode 3 had aired, the New York Times did an op-ed with that photo, more the Ambrose book cover, but it was all the first responders, and it just said, "Our Band of Brothers." And that, I realized what the show was dovetailing into this other historical moment, and we all talked to each other about this thing and realized that it was that for us. The show was a medicine for us to remember that we've done this before.
It's almost as if it had been, as if it was preordained, that this show would be the medicine that the country partially needed. Of course, not in and of itself, not enough, but it helped. But not just in America. I will say, I know that Dick Winters would get letters, and maybe some of the other men, and he shared some of them with me, from people all over the world. Usually young men, but people all over the world who decided to join some kind of service. Police, fire, from, again, not just America, but from Europe, from Asia, countries because the show aired all over the world. People who would write to him and say, because watching what you did, I've decided to help my country in this way. So it had a big impact internationally as well. Any other questions?
We have a question in the back to your right, panelists.
Yeah, this is for Rick. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your appearance here today. Your portrayal, excuse me, of George, for all of us that have served platoon level, company level, we had a George Lutz in our midst. And it's a compliment. Your imitation
Thank you.
of Colonel Sink, your line in the movie theater when the boys are trying to watch the film.
Yes.
All of us that wore a uniform had a George Lutz with us.
Yeah.
And we appreciated it.
Well, thank you. It was man, I can't even, there's no words for it. The honor that it was to be that thing. And I've spent the last 20 years in short elevator rides and long walks with people I don't know who say similar things like that, and it's an honor to walk into that experience. But the man was, it's an honor of my life to have done.
I think you bring up a really good point, if I may, by saying that you had a Luz in your company or platoon. I mean, Band of Brothers is about these wonderful men who did wonderful things and these specific guys, but it is a metaphor for all of us, not us, but all of you who serve in the military. It's about anybody who's in a uniform and the things they have to go through and the things they have to do for their nation and the costs it costs. I mean, it's not just about easy company. It's about men at war.
Yeah, it's about the coming together. I think one of the things we initially talked about when we were first developing the series is essentially what it's about is men who at the beginning of the story wouldn't occasion a cup of coffee together, by the end of the story would be willing to die for each other.
Yep.
That's the story. And that obviously transcends Easy Company, it transcends World War II, it transcends American military, and it even transcends the military. A group of people doing something dangerous but worthwhile come to love each other.
In service of others.
In service of
for
others.
love. I mean, I now work with first responders, and I have a friend who was in the FDNY who was at 9/11 and lost a lot of people. And he actually found out I was coming here, and he's like, "Can you send me the link? I really want to watch it." And I think that I didn't realize it, but they call firefighters in New York the bravest. The police are called the finest, but the FDNY are the bravest. And these are people who go to work every day. They leave, they kiss their wives and children goodbye, and they don't know if they're going to come home at night. So it's sort of very similar to what.
And that's the point of, I mean, at the end of Band, one of the things that's so great in that ending, in that montage, is they all went back to their normal lives.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't put on capes and masks and become superheroes at night. They got into a cab and they got into the mail truck and they did their jobs, you know? And that to me is the big takeaway, because any of us can be those guys if we're in the right circumstances and we rise to the occasion.
Well, we hope we could be them.
We hope we could be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
thank
hope.
you. Yeah, absolutely. We
I mean,
hope
I
we
think
could be.
We've talked about it so many times. I mean, if you do your job right when you do a show like this, the audience has to ask itself, what would I do? What would I do if I had to jump out of that C-47? What would I do? Would I get out of the Higgins boat? Would I hold the line at Bastogne? Ultimately, as we know we do our job, we've done our scripted job right if you ask yourself that question watching the show. You had a question right here.
Bring the microphone to you, sir, just a moment.
Yes, well, let me say I thoroughly enjoyed the series, but some of the individuals portrayed were not shown in a particularly flattering manner. Did the production company ever receive any input from their families?
Can you? I think I know what you're referring to, but can you be more specific?
Private Cobb, Lieutenant
Dyke.
Captain Sobel, they were not portrayed in a positive manner, and I just wondered whether their families ever got in touch with the production company.
Yeah, I don't believe so. They really hadn't stayed in touch. I mean, they weren't the Sobel family, the Dyke family, didn't stay in touch with the Easy Company extended family. So, and then by the time we got into production, I don't recall ever receiving. But I will say, and I'll let John take this. I think we had certain Captain Sobel. We couldn't have changed that name. I don't think we would have really contemplated that.
What I would say is, well, first of all, you have to remember we're making this in 1999. There's really no internet, so anything we learn mostly through the guys themselves. So, for example, everybody thought that, what's his name died in 3, Blythe. That Blythe, they had all told us that Albert Blythe died shortly after the war from his wounds, because that's what all the men from Easy Company thought. Well, it turns out, no, he didn't die. He went to Korea, and he had a whole other life. Similarly with Sobel, I guess he had not been coming to he didn't go to the reunions at all, so nobody was really in touch with his family. And again, it's 99. It's not like you can just go on the computer and find out, you know, who's who and where they live, and you couldn't do that. So, you know, we all, at least creatively where I was standing from, it was all from the perspective of the men we were interviewing. So the way that we portray Sobel is kind of accurate from the perspective of Winters, Malarkey, and, you know, just those guys, Lipton. That's what they thought of him. Dyke's a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Dyke we did not get right, and I think a lot of people feel bad about that. But I don't think we knew that going in, because again, our understanding of Dyke was being told from the guys at Foy and their experience with Dyke. Was that the full character of Dyke? No, apparently not. No, he was a very good officer in a lot of ways, and he's not portrayed that way in Band. And so, you know, this is a huge project with thousands of people working on it for years, and we get stuff wrong. You know, it's impossible to get it all right. I think we did pretty darn good, though.
Yeah, I think the bigger question is, you know, some people, if your drama is going to be realistic at all, for it to be compelling drama, there has to be conflict. Obviously, there's conflict when you're at war and you're fighting the Germans. That's a given. But there has to be more interior conflict, even within the company. I think the conflict between Major Winters and, or at the time, Lieutenant Winters and Captain Sobel goes to the heart of the story, goes to the heart of how Easy Company became Easy Company. So we had to, Captain Sobel was really one of the most important characters in the entire show. What we might have, I don't think we did consider, and again, that was a different world, we might have changed his name. That's something I think if we were doing it today, maybe would do that.
Actually, in Masters,
And we, Masters of the Year,
we do
which
that
John
a
and I
couple
are
of times. There's a couple.
we have changed the name of a couple of characters who we have to show in a less than flattering light in a couple of instances. But just in terms of the drama, on occasion, you have to show people in an unflattering light, and that all the more so because it reveals something about, in this case, it reveals something about both Lieutenant Winters and how the men felt about him with that mutiny.
But I will say, we actually took your point into account on Masters, because there is a character or two that are real men who did some not great things, and Kirk and I talked about it specifically, like we can't put that family in an uncomfortable position, so let's use a different name. No big deal, you know.
We'll get to the two questions over there. Jason, Rick told a story about Bill and You Better Be Funny. They got to know these NCOs or these enlistees. Did the veterans that you met with get to know Meehan that well as he was an officer? Was that another hurdle for you to learn who he was and become him in a way?
Well, first of all, that would have been after the fact. Second of all, this is the first one of these I've ever done. So I didn't, unlike the other actors, get to meet a lot of the veterans for one reason or another. It was never one thing. It was never deliberate. But I just wasn't able to make any of the reunions and anniversaries and D-Day anniversaries. So I can't actually answer that question. But I will say it is daunting trying to play a man, because it's not really a character, you know, it's a person. When, again, as John said, there was no internet. So I was handed a research package, which was excellent, I will say. But it was all I had to go on. And I think for some of the guys, that's all they had to go on too. I'd love to have spoken to the veterans about Meehan, but I didn't, and I'm kind of sad now, actually, thinking about it.
Hey, if I can get back to Sobel, his son, Michael, came to the 2002 Phoenix reunion. Really? It was quite interesting, and he was able to tell us a side of his dad that we never knew. Apparently, his dad was a pretty funny guy, probably maybe as funny as my dad. Who knows? And but we had a nice chat about the scene of cutting the fences. You know, a lot of people ask me, "Hey, was that true that your dad was impersonating Major Horton?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, it certainly was. It was in the book, and Ricky did a great job of, you know, impersonating Major Horton." And so we had a pretty good chuckle on that one there. So, well, actually, I'm not sure he really chuckled as much as I did. But anyway, but the good thing about Michael was he was able to tell the men, meet a lot of the men about his dad. And I think at the end of that weekend, he had felt a weight was lifted off his shoulders.
Great. That's funny. I went to that reunion and I don't remember that. So that's...
He came in on like Saturday.
Right.
And I remember him walking in, and I don't know how I recognized him when somebody said, "Hey, that's Michael Sobel." And I'm saying, okay, let's see, who is here now? So I looked around real fast, and I looked at Bill Wingate, because Wingate always used to say, "Hey, Sobel wasn't a bad guy." So I went up to him, I said, "Hey, Michael, how are you, blah, blah, blah. Hey, I want you to come over and meet Bill Wingate." So boom, he went to Wingate. Then he went to Garnier, and then Heffron, and this guy and that guy. So it was really fantastic to see him get a chance. It was very emotional for him as well. So it was really it was an inspiring weekend.
One of the things that talking to a lot of the guys about Captain Sobel, a lot of the men said that in a way he was responsible too for Easy Company becoming the company that they were. They just didn't feel comfortable going into combat with him. that his toughness in training was one thing, and they in retrospect came to appreciate what he did. They just didn't think, and I think we do kind of show this in the first episode, that he wasn't really meant to be a combat officer.
To your right, towards the front.
Hey, thank y'all for coming out. I just want to start off by saying I love the whole series, obviously, it's kind of why I'm here. But the 2 episodes that really stick out to me the most are when the ones right around Bastogne. I heard y'all mention a few times. So my question is really for all of y'all, is what it was like to capture that, and what it was like speaking to the men who were actually there.
Well, yes, I think we had 2 episodes that centered on Bastogne and the Battle of the Bulge. And I think because it was such a defining moment, I mean, D-Day is one, and then the Battle of the Bulge, and particularly holding the line at Bastogne, is such a defining moment that I think it was one of those, there was a couple of those things that we knew we had to get right. Again, D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge are so well known. They were such defining moments for the 101st, let alone Easy Company. So I know that there was, again, we keep saying responsibility, but there was a certain sense of that. And there was one of the things that we had to do, and this goes to production design and all the other stuff, is we needed the audience to feel cold. I forget who was it, Jody, which one of the men, we opened one of the episodes, I've never been as cold as, I think it was Babe, maybe.
No, J.B. Stokes.
It was Stokes.
Stokes,
yeah.
okay.
And they all talk about it. Yeah. It was always the hardest part of the interview because one guy just said you could see them. They would all start to cry at that point, and he just said, "I better stop because it was just terrible."
And by the way, it's pretty intense when a 75-year-old man who's a war hero starts crying in front of you.
It really is.
The power of the memory is so extreme that it can come back to him like that.
Your instinct is to jump in and help them out, which is absolutely the last thing you can do because you don't want to ruin the shot. You want to be able to use it later and not have the person who's talking to them, their voice come up. So it was pretty harrowing, I would have to say.
Yeah.
But especially that, because that's where Joe, Toy, and
Bill
lost their legs.
And it was probably, and George, you can confirm this, probably the low point because they had to be on the front line for day after day and turning into weeks. It wasn't it wasn't jumping into Normandy or storming a dike in Holland. This was their Alamo. This was their Alamo 10 degrees below zero. Again, day after week.
And having to dig through the frozen ground.
Yes.
To make the
And they had been
over and over because they kept having to move positions.
Well, and that's another
Which is
point that they
exhausting.
were. This is, as paratroopers, they're always going forward. They're always leaping ahead. Now they had to hunker down and dig foxholes, and that's not what paratroopers are supposed to do. So I think, I think that was. They conveyed to us that it was the most difficult, many of them did, the most difficult part of their service. And so we, again, had that responsibility and took it very seriously.
And I just, sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just going to say on Christmas Eve, though.
Yeah.
You're right, Christmas Eve.
That was always like.
And when the boys were supposed to be home by Christmas.
Yeah.
Right.
That they were singing.
We lost a bunch of friends who we were shooting with.
Right.
So Frank left, Kirk left, Richie Muck left, Pancalo left, and replacements came in. And that was the hardest thing, was like, you have no fucking idea what we've just done. We, as actors, you're like, I can't give you the reference. We weren't here for boot camp. You weren't here for Toccoa boot camp. You weren't here for all the things, which was exactly what it was meant to be.
Another parallel.
Yeah.
Another real-life parallel.
But we were so tight at that point. Yeah. The cast was so tight at that point. And to lose these castmates, I mean, to just be like, okay, that's it, bye, we'll see you at the premiere of the thing. Like Frank leaving and Kirk leaving was a huge, huge event. Frank and I were just talking about that, like, yeah, but you were around for the Thanksgiving party. I was like, but I left and I put him in all these spaces that he's not. I put Frank in all these spaces that he's not there.
Well, he fills up a lot of spaces.
Yeah, he does.
Frank.
Yeah, he is
Starts
Frank.
talking,
Yeah, that's
you're
it.
pretty
You're
sure
right,
he's
you're-
there.
But yeah, that was another parallel for us. It was great.
Panelists, we have one more question here, and then we'll leave it to the panel for closing thoughts.
Sure.
Hello, David Bankston, Army veteran, combat veteran, privileged to be a paratrooper. What you all did, obviously, it spoke for a generation, and then people like my father, my grandfather, who was a bombardier in a B-25. I mean, it's just that million stories that can be told about World War II, but you tell one right like you did, and it can speak to people in either different theaters and different experiences, so appreciate that. And one of the reasons I think that it's so popular among, I mean, I grew up with Band of Brothers for 20 years in the Army. Every Army officer wanted to be Dick Winters. And, you know,
We all did too.
The
Yeah.
NCOs, yeah. I mean, it's just.
I just wanted to marry him, but
Yeah.
Wanted to
He
marry
really
him.
was. I
Too
mean,
late.
he really is that guy, Dick Winters. I mean,
Yeah.
he's the real deal, man.
Exactly. But you got it right, and you got it right technically. And I think a lot of people would agree. Watching a military movie with a veteran and you've got technical mistakes is the worst experience of your life. Because you showed the respect, and obviously you had the veterans there, but showing the respect to get the little things right, maybe not perfect, but right, is important. So just how did you do that? I mean, because not only it was historically had to be correct, and it was, 50 plus years. So you did a great job, and just thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And I think I'm glad you said that because that's one of the first things you do. I mean, before the cameras ever roll, you have to have the sets, you have to have the scenery, you have to have the locations, you have to have the words. And I will say that in all the projects we've worked on, but specifically Band of Brothers, it's also helpful to us. I'm sure it's helpful to the actors, it's helpful to the writers, it's helpful to the directors, it's helpful to everyone to get it as accurate and to put them in the place to do their job, to portray George Luz, to determine just the right angle to get this shot at, to get all those details right and also I will have to say, the dedication that I think you can sense from those of us on the stage, I promise you, is many, many fold of the people in the wardrobe department, in the set design department, prop department. They are as dedicated. That's their.
They had the same degree of dedication in their little unit. Like there was this man called Anthony Pratt was the art director. And, you know, he had 100 or 200 people working for him, and they were as committed to getting everybody on these projects, masters too, and I'm sure the Pacific. It's not just a job, and I think you can see that. And as Kirk was saying, it goes to everybody, the wardrobe stylist, everybody. Everybody just, it was the most important thing in their lives, and they showed up.
I think just as I'm sure that attention to detail helps you in your military career, helps you be a better soldier, sailor, Marine, officer, sergeant. It's the same thing here. Attention to detail, attention to accurate detail is essential. But also, as John said, it became a cause. It became a cause. Wherever you were in the organization or on the project, that was your cause, and you were going to do the best you could.
I'm going to take MC's prerogative and allow one last question because this gentleman outranks me.
People, thanks. One of the things, it came out in 2001. I was a private in Fort Benning, gung-ho, ready to go, right? And then I've watched it throughout my career. And one of the things that makes me feel is inadequate. And that's a good thing. We don't fight Superman anymore right now, thank God. No near peers. We've all fought people in pajamas with inadequate equipment. So I just want to say thank you. I've watched the series a dozen times. My son over there, about 5-6 more years, he'll start watching it. And maybe he'll fall in our path, and I hope he doesn't have to fight Superman. You know, I hope we don't have near peers. But I really appreciate you guys, my brothers and sisters, and thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a great way to close it. Round of applause for the panelists, Kirk, Jody, John, Jason, Rick, and George. I want to thank the audience, not just for being here with us, but if I could ask any veterans of our nation's service of any era, please wave or stand and be recognized. It's harder for this batch to hide, but any active duty, if you could please stand and be recognized for what you do for our country. This is perhaps the most important group. Any family members, including those two little ones in the back. You all support our service members, and they're allowed to support our nation. So would the family members of any service members or veterans please stand and be recognized. I'm going to ask one last individual to please stand and be recognized. We've heard about the importance of these stories being captured by Jody and her team, by being portrayed by Rick and Jason on screen. We are delighted to have one of our former colleagues here with us, Captain Patrick Stephen, who worked in our oral history department, and it was his job to travel the country and collect as many of the veteran stories as possible while they still could. Patrick, it's great to see you, sir. Thank you for being back. Well, this concludes our kickoff with our community outreach program to the veterans, active duty, and of course the families. I'd like to remind you that the buttons you all have allow you access to the museum for the day. If you've seen it already, go see it again. If you haven't seen it, you need more than a day to see it. But thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and have a great day.